James, a lot of people are telling me growth mindset initiatives are a waste of time. Please tell me, this isn't true.
Hey, Michael, thanks for having me today. Yeah, look, when you hear people talking like that, what they're talking about is that growth mindsets absolutely make a difference. There's no two ways about that. We've got Carol Dweck's research over about the last 20 years that show the importance of growth mindsets. What's not working at the moment are our interventions. The way schools are going about trying to change students' mindsets aren't working. And there's a whole bunch of reasons for that. But among them is the fact that we've misunderstood what we're trying to achieve. We went to conferences a few years ago where people started talking about mindsets, and someone put up a poster that said, this is a fixed mindset, this is a growth mindset, we should all be doing this. And we all went, oh, that's great. Let's go into classrooms and teach kids growth mindsets. And that was our first mistake. We taught mindset as if it was a topic. We taught about it when we should have been teaching for it. But more importantly, what we've failed to recognize is that this whole idea of fixed mindset, growth mindset, it doesn't really exist. It's not like there's two types of people walking around in the world. Some of them going, this is me, this has always been me, I can't change, I hate mistakes, I can never learn. And other people walking around going, oh, I can learn anything, I can be the best in the world if you let me live long enough. It just doesn't work like that. In reality, what actually happens is that our mindset falls along this continuum. And this is something I've created based on Carol Dweck's work, to recognize that we're not a world full of people with fixed mindsets and growth mindsets, but rather we fall along this continuum. And our job as educators is not to instill or install or ask students to adopt a growth mindset, but rather our job is to nudge and nurture and to encourage students to develop an increasingly growth-orientated mindset. And when we realize that mindset isn't a state, it's a continuum, it resets our expectations, first off, of what we're trying to achieve. We're not going to count the number of students with growth mindsets in our classrooms. Rather, what we're going to do is to work out how much more growth-orientated they've become. And two, it changes the way we approach the work. Rather than going in and saying, kids, this is a growth mindset, we should be doing this. Don't say you can't yet, and all those sort of social media myths that we can talk about in a minute. It lets us recognize that what we need to do is to fill our environments with little positive mindset movers, little messages that remind students and encourage students to understand their capacity for growth and help them become just that little bit more growth orientated. When teachers, walk into their classroom and expect that if they put a poster up and say a few catchphrases, that kids will have a growth mindset in 6 months or a year, and when that time comes round and they don't, teachers around the world have been looking at their kids saying, this stuff doesn't work. That one certainly doesn't have a growth mindset. Let's dump that and move on to next year's initiative. And it's that sort of problem where we've expected them to have a growth mindset as a result of what we do, and that not happening, that has resulted in the sorts of frustrations that you mentioned at the start, where people say this stuff around growth mindsets doesn't work. Well, yeah, it doesn't. If the way you approach it is to say, this is fixed, this is growth, do that, please. We need a much more complex, much more subtle approach to it. As Carol Dweck's been saying recently, implementing growth mindsets has turned out to be far more complex than we initially thought. And the way to go about it is to recognize that growth mindset is not a declaration. It's a journey. And it's a journey along this continuum. So I think, Michael, you've got a link there you want to give people that they're interested in this continuum? Whoops.
Yeah, so I'll be sharing some links, not only to your site, but also to the fact that we're going to be doing an online program with Acamus that you're going to be leading, a Train the Trainer. And I think it's really important when we talk about this idea of a journey and a continuum, is that it's not just a matter of like labeling and setting up a few activities or having some trainers come in over a course of a school year, or maybe even 2 school years for the fully invested. they have to see that it has to be really built into their daily activities. It's got to be part of the narrative, their backstory. One of the exciting things that you always talk about is backstory. And I would really like to get more into this idea of backstory and how that kind of lends itself to creating the culture. So maybe you can give us a little bit more information about how schools, if they're interested in this, they need to go beyond thinking activities and labels and workshops to this idea of backstory.
Yeah, look, when we talk about growth mindset strategies and how we actually change students' mindset, the one overarching strategy is this idea of backstories. It's the way we communicate the idea that the person you are today is a shadow of the person you're going to be in the future. And what matters is not who you are, but rather what you do in order to become the person that you want to become in the future. And if you've got a minute, I've got a quick story that I think your audience will really sort of resonate with, and it really highlights this idea. The story is about Picasso, and it goes along these lines, that Picasso was sitting in Central Park in New York, and he was quietly sitting on a park bench on his own with his sketch pad out sketching. And a lady recognized him and approached him and said, "Oh, Picasso, I love your work. It's so amazing. And I saw you sitting here. Would you mind, please, would you mind terribly if you did a sketch for me? I'd be so grateful." A bit audacious, really, to walk up to Picasso and ask him to sketch for you, but that's what she did. Anyway, Picasso got his sketch pad out and flipped over a spare page and 2 minutes later produced this sketch, tore it out of his sketchbook and gave it to this lady. Now you can imagine her response. Like, she's just gone, "Oh my God, thank you so much. This is incredible. I'll treasure it forever. This is fantastic." And Picasso's gone, "That'll be $50,000. Thanks very much." Now the lady's a bit taken back. $50,000, she said. How can you charge $50,000 for 2 minutes work? That's outrageous. And Picasso quietly, just calmly responded by saying, "I'm sorry, miss, but I think you've misunderstood me. You see, that sketch didn't take me 2 minutes. That sketch took me a lifetime." And see, what Picasso was saying was that the value wasn't in the 2 minutes spent sketching. The value was in the lifetime, the backstory of becoming the person who can sketch in 2 minutes. And when we appreciate that, when you appreciate that the person you see today, the Picasso that can stand there and sketch in 2 minutes, wasn't always like that. They were a 3-year-old, just as useless as every other 3-year-old, drawing with their fists clenched and crayons and all the rest of it. But they spent a lifetime developing, growing, building, extending, becoming the person that they are today. And every growth mindset message that we can fill our school with is going to reflect that journey. It's going to reflect the idea that you don't look inside yourself to discover who you are, but rather you engage in a process to become the person you want to be. I talk to schools all the time about this idea. And I'll give you a quick example of one of the strategies we talk about in the course that I'm doing with you. One of the, what I call little mindset movers that we create in the school is to, when we talk about students' bests, we always talk about their bests and their standards and things like that. I always talk about attaching a timestamp to that. So we never talk about a student's best work. We talk about their current best, their best to date, their best so far. Because when we say it like that, that's your best at the moment, your best so far, your best this year. We're just putting a little message in there, an inference that it's not going to stay your best. Next year, you're going to look back and realize that your best is only your best when you measure by last year's standards. By tomorrow's standards, it's your second best. And that your journey, your backstory, is one of continuous growth. So that's the